In this module we will mark the United States' transition from a continental to a world power. We will begin in this lecture to learn the basic principles of American foreign policy, where they came from and how they evolved during the 19th and early 20th centuries. We are going to consider American imperialism in relationship to other imperial powers in the age of imperialism. The term imperialism refers to the practice of one country extending its control over another for economic benefits. While America did not construct a traditional empire, its expansion during the 19th century shares certain imperialistic traits with industrial powers like Britain and France. Let's consider how American imperialism unfolded and what made it distinct from its European counterparts. The fundamental nature of American foreign policy was guided by the principles set forth by George Washington, the nation's first president. Upon leaving office, Washington presented a farewell address, a document that, although primarily penned by Alexander Hamilton, encapsulated his vision for America's path on the international stage. In Washington's farewell address, two principles were emphasized: neutrality, no entangling alliances, and free trade. Recognizing the United States as a weak nation amidst the tumult of European conflicts, Washington championed neutrality. He understood the peril of taking sides and steered the country towards a path of peace and self-preservation. Alongside this, Washington rejected the restrictive chains of European mercantilism, advocating for the freedom to trade with any nation, unbounded by limitations. These two principles became the bedrock of American foreign policy until after World War I. In the early 19th century, the Spanish Empire in America was in crisis as a result of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. Through the middle of the 1820s, all of Spain's colonies in the Americas, with the exception of Cuba and Puerto Rico, gained independence. Unlike the United States, these newly independent colonies were not able to establish stable governments, leading to a time of political instability and economic hardship. Even as Spain lost its grip on the Americas, its former colonies became tempting targets for colonization by others, including Britain and France. The United States was drawn to the revolutionary movements in Spanish America for two main reasons. To begin with, there was an ideological kinship, as Americans saw these struggles for liberty as a continuation of their own fight for independence, and many Spanish-American revolutionary leaders were inspired by the success of the United States. Americans believed that the success of liberal governments in Spanish America validated American revolutionary ideals. But at the same time, the end of Spain's trade monopoly opened lucrative avenues for economic partnerships. These dual interests, ideological affinity and economic opportunity, paved the way for the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. The Monroe Doctrine was a bold declaration to European powers. It announced that the United States would not tolerate further colonization or interference in the Western Hemisphere. The doctrine stated that the United States would view any new colonization in the Americas as the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States. There are two important things to note here. First, the doctrine was aimed at new colonization. The United States would not interfere in colonies already established. Secondly, the doctrine does not threaten any action as a result of colonization. This is because at this time the United States was still weak in relation to European imperial powers. The other aspect of the Monroe Doctrine stated that the United States would not interfere in Europe. The United States' lack of military strength meant that European powers paid little attention to the Monroe Doctrine. The U.S. did not have the power to enforce it. But the Monroe Doctrine would evolve from a disregarded declaration to a symbol of American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. In the 1860s, a bold challenge to the Monroe Doctrine unfolded in Mexico, where French Emperor Napoleon III initiated an intervention, aiming to establish a puppet monarchy under Maximilian I. This act was a clear violation of the Monroe Doctrine. The United States was initially unable to enforce its principles because of the tumult of the Civil War. As the Union and Confederacy clashed, the United States found itself fighting for its own survival, rendering it incapable of projecting power beyond its borders to counteract French ambitions in Mexico. Yet, the United States emerged from the Civil War with one of the most experienced and battle-hardened armies in the world. Recognizing the strategic moment, General Ulysses S. Grant ordered the movement of troops to the U.S.-Mexico border. This show of force, combined with diplomatic pressure from Washington, signaled a looming threat of military action against France. The French, already contending with resistance from Mexican Republicans led by President Benito Juárez, faced the prospect of American intervention. Napoleon III, weighing the costs of an extended conflict against a revitalized United States, opted to withdraw French forces from Mexico. The withdrawal in 1867 led to the collapse of the Second Mexican Empire and the restoration of the Mexican Republic. The French intervention in Mexico serves as a testament to the United States' growing prowess and its commitment to the Monroe Doctrine. It highlights a period where, through a combination of military readiness and diplomatic pressure, the United States began to assert itself as a dominant force in the Western Hemisphere, capable of defending its doctrines and influencing the course of international affairs. American foreign policy has always been a balance between idealism and practical interests. This duality raises a crucial question: is the United States a beacon of freedom and justice, or is it driven by economic ambition? The answer is yes. America's actions on the global stage are shaped by a genuine belief in its ideals and a pragmatic pursuit of economic self-interest, creating a complex interplay of motives. The accusations of hypocrisy in American foreign policy stem from its simultaneous pursuit of idealistic principles and economic gains. However, this dual focus more accurately reflects a complex national character. The United States earnestly believes in liberty and justice while also seeking to advance its self-interest. As in its domestic policy, two principles coexist in American identity: idealism and economic interest. The United States has a split personality, with each asserting themselves at various times and often, as in the case of foreign policy, at the same time. This duality makes American foreign policy unique, occasionally contradictory, and challenging to predict. The complexities of U.S. foreign policy reflect the nation's unique character, a blend of high ideals and pragmatic interests. In 1895, a territorial dispute between Venezuela and British Guiana demonstrated and cemented American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere. The contention arose over an indeterminate boundary, which suddenly gained immense value with the discovery of gold. Venezuela claimed the land based on historical precedents, while Britain asserted its sovereignty, setting the stage for a confrontation that would draw in the United States and test the limits of the Monroe Doctrine. Venezuela appealed to the United States for support in the dispute based on the Monroe Doctrine. The United States responded by invoking a bold interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine through the Olney Corollary. Secretary of State Richard Olney declared that the United States possessed de facto sovereignty over the Americas, asserting that its decisions were as binding as law. This stance was a profound expression of American exceptionalism, suggesting that the U.S. held a divine-like authority within its sphere of influence. In the heart of the Olney Corollary lies a powerful assertion: the United States is practically sovereign on this continent, and its fiat is law upon the subjects to which it confines its interposition. Let's unpack this. When we say the United States is practically sovereign, we're speaking of a sovereignty that, while not absolute in a legalistic sense, is undeniable in practice. It means that in the Americas, the U.S. wields influence and authority that rivals that of a sovereign ruler, dictating outcomes with little challenge. The phrase, "its fiat is law," further underscores this authority. Fiat here is used in the sense of a decree or an order that must be followed. In the Bible, God says, "Fiat lux, let there be light," and the Bible reports that merely by God saying so, light came to be. Thus, in Olney's words, when the United States makes a decree regarding its sphere of influence, it is in essence asserting a godlike hegemony. This interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine through the Olney Corollary marked a significant evolution in American foreign policy. It claimed an almost divine right to dictate terms within its hemisphere, asserting a level of control and influence that went beyond traditional notions of sovereignty. Understanding these concepts is crucial for grasping how the United States viewed its position in the world at the turn of the 20th century and the implications for its neighbors in the Americas. Britain yielded to American demands. Britain was not intimidated by Olney's boldness, but it had interests to defend in other parts of the world and did not want to get mired in a conflict with the United States in the Americas. This symbolized the broader recognition of U.S. hegemony in the Americas. Britain's decision, driven by strategic considerations to maintain amicable relations with the U.S., underscored the acceptance of American dominion and deterred European colonial ambitions in the Western Hemisphere. The Venezuela boundary dispute and the Olney corollary revealed the U.S. as the preeminent power in the Americas. This episode did not just reaffirm the Monroe Doctrine, it set a precedent for American interventionism that would define its foreign policy in the century to come. Understanding this critical moment helps us grasp the complexities of American dominance and its lasting impact on international relations. The transformation of the United States from a weak and isolated former colony to a world power was marked by a complex interplay of idealism and pragmatism, where ideological affinities for freedom and democracy coexisted with strategic economic and political interests. This historical trajectory, characterized by both commendable aspirations and contentious actions, underscores the often contradictory nature of American foreign policy. It reflects a nation striving to reconcile its high ideals with the pragmatic pursuit of national interests, a balancing act that continues to shape its engagement with the world.